Okay, good morning everybody. My name's Randy Kutcher. I'm a professor at University of Saskatchewan. Thanks to Ken for a second invitation. I must have done something right last year. I was here for a field day they had about this time of year. I do plant diseases. I spent half of my career at Ag Canada in Saskatchewan working more oil seeds and general crop rotations, crop production studies with emphasis of course on pathology or disease issues. And then I moved to the university about 8 years ago and they told me to work on cereals. So it's everything from soup to nuts and cereals, wheat, barley, oats, all classes of wheat, and they stuck in flax, which I'm not sure why flax is with the cereals, but anyway, there it is. So we do some flax work, we do some plasma work. So I think I'm going to talk a little bit about Fusarium for the most part, but feel free to ask me other questions if there's something you want to ask disease-wise. My graduate student Alejandra Oviedo is with me. Alejandra is from Ecuador. I have a small project in Ecuador and met a few years ago. And she is an expert in the lab and now she wants to learn all about the field. So I told her this is a big field project and she said, yeah, I'm interested, but when you see the size of it, I wonder if you knew what you were getting into. Anyway, I'll let Alejandra give you a little bit of a background on what we're trying to do here, but it's what we call our crop sequence study. Alejandra and I have been up in the Peace earlier in the week because we have this test up there at Lacombe, and here we have at Morden and Brandon in Manitoba and 3 sites in Saskatchewan. So we're making a bit of a tour so Alejandra can meet everybody and see the test so that when the data comes in this fall, we'll have a clue as to who's doing what and where it was. Want to tell them a bit about what Alejandra?
Yeah, as Randy said, I'm from Ecuador. I have my bachelor in biotechnology, and now I'm doing my master's in plant science at the University of Saskatchewan. So what you see here, this beautiful plot, it's a crop sequence study. It's part of one of our locations. We have like 8 locations distributed in the prairies. We have locations in Alberta, Manitoba, and Saskatchewan too. So what we want to do here is build some suggestions for reduced Fusarium blight. So we have a crop sequence study including cereals, we are including pulses and oil seeds. So in this trial here in Lethbridge, you have like almost 10 crops, including hemp, quinoa. So our main objective is that we want to have all the recommendations for all you guys to know which crop is better to use when you're having a rotation, including cereals and pulses. Yep, that's mainly yeah. So as you can see here, you have like 4 replicates trial, 10 crops, and as you can see, it's really big. We have wheat, durum, all the cereals that you're growing here in Saskatchewan. And we also include corn. I know that corn is not a big issue right now here in Alberta, but corn is getting more popular across the prairies, especially in Manitoba, Ontario, Quebec also. So we want to be some steps ahead to see what's going to happen if we have all this long-term rotation using corn also. Yeah, so that's mainly what we're doing here.
Okay. So yeah, this trial is a bit bigger. Ken's very ambitious, so he has 10 crops. Normally our sites have 5 to 6, and so we cross-seed them. So last year they were in strips one way, and this year in strips this way. So it becomes not just 10 crops, it becomes 10 by 10. So you have 100 plots per rep, which is huge. So it'll be great to have the data, but it's going to be quite a challenge next year because we'll seed it all to durum, and we will look at each plot. So we'll have corn, durum. We'll have wheat, like wheat, durum. We'll have peas, hemp, durum. So we'll have all these combinations of non-host and host crops of Fusarium head blight, and then we'll look to see, what is the impact on the durum next year. So it's quite a large trial, and of course, even though we have 6 to 8 different sites across the prairies, they probably all won't get good Fusarium. So good for me means lots of Fusarium. I know good for you means no Fusarium, but we're a little disappointed. Like last year it was so dry, we had no Fusarium in our nursery last year, so we're really ramping up the irrigation for it. So just talk a little bit about the disease. I'm sure most people are aware of it. Fusarium's quite a large genus. There's many species. The species we're most concerned about is Graminearum. It's spread across North America basically, or the prairies for sure, in the last 20 to 30 years. It causes damage to the actual kernels themselves, so you can see Fusarium damaged kernels in your sample, and it causes toxins to be formed in that seed. And there's not a strong correlation. Sometimes you see a lot of damage, but not so much toxin. But other times vice versa. The seed may look not so bad, but there's a lot of toxin in it. So you can't feed it. You certainly can't sell it for milling. What do you do with it? So if it's a problem across the prairies, say 2016 was a really bad year, there's nothing to blend it off with. Some people are just out of luck at basically being told to get rid of it, dump it, destroy it. So it's a really difficult disease to deal with. The way that we have to deal with it, I would say three things. Crop sequence, so crop rotation, trying to reduce the crops that you grow that are host to Fusarium. Across the prairies, of course, very common to grow canola wheat. That's not ideal for Fusarium or for the issues we have in canola, but it's been profitable for many years. With Fusarium, if you can lengthen it out to manage your Fusarium to at least 3, 4 or more crops, you should have a lot less Fusarium issues. The second strategy, of course, is the best variety you can buy that has disease resistance. So with the hard red springs, we're getting up there. We've got moderately resistant varieties. They look pretty good compared to 30 years ago, 20 years ago, but we don't have anything we can say can control the disease completely. There's no highly resistant cultivars yet. Unfortunately for durum growers, we're just starting. We're basically moderately susceptible at best. They're pretty much all susceptible for the most part. So the breeders have quite a ways to go to be able to develop a variety that they can kind of guarantee you that has at least a moderate level, but they are working on it. The last thing you can do is probably, well, I shouldn't say last, but one of the last major things at this time of year you can do is put on a fungicide. So the crop's headed out already. You have a relatively short window to spray. Generally, by the time you see those first anthers to the time that all the anthers are out, you have, I don't know, what's it like down here? 3 days, 7 days, not a lot of days to get on it. 3 days under irrigation. So your window is very short, and that makes it really challenging. None of the products are registered for control. They're registered for suppression. So the data I've seen, maybe you can reduce your toxin load by half, maybe you can reduce your damaged kernels by half, but it's not a cure-all. So the best we can recommend is try to lengthen out your rotation, diversify your rotation, use the best variety you can get, which, sorry for durum growers, there's not a lot of choice, and then decide if the weather is such that you should put a fungicide on. So up until the 20th of June in Saskatchewan, we thought we probably weren't putting any fungicide on because we had no rain. It looked pretty dismal. We've had 4 inches in the last 3 weeks, so we're looking a lot better. I think yield has probably been compromised, but at least it's better late than never. Now we're trying to make the decision, should we spray or should we not? We're getting higher humidity than normal. Saskatchewan, like down here, is pretty dry, but the models are based on the amount of relative humidity in the air, so the number of hours per day or week or during the flowering period where the humidity is high, they say 90%, and the temperatures between 15 and 30, those are high-risk hours. And the more high-risk hours you have during your flowering period that you measure could give you an indication whether it'd be worthwhile to apply a fungicide. So, do you do 2 applications?
Do you do a flyweight and then a head spray, or do you just do a head spray?
For fungicide timing in Fusarium head blight, it's really you need those flowers to be emerged and open. So you don't want to go on at the flag generally. For the leaf diseases, yes, that would be a good time to control your leaf diseases, but if Fusarium's your main objective, you want to wait till you see those first anthers is the recommendation right now.
So when would you get the most bang for your buck then?
When do you get the most bang for your buck? Yeah, it's really difficult. It's in hard red spring and winter wheat, there's been a lot of fungicide work through the States and into Eastern Canada and Manitoba. Nobody's done much on durum. So we've got a couple graduate students that have been working durum, and the recommendations are very similar. So from the time you see those first anthers come out until all of the anthers are out, that's probably the ideal window. But we've seen a later application has benefits in a really high risk year that, if you can't get that window, maybe you still have a few days after what's normally considered too late, and it still can give you a pretty good, pretty high benefit.
They start flowering in the middle though, right?
They start flowering in the middle. It is confusing, yeah, no.
How much has it flowered?
It is, it's very confusing, especially if you have a lot of tillering, you have a lot of heads that are wide. I know, you guys have a tough choice. I'm just the guy that's telling you what. Yeah, no, it's, I would say work with an agronomist that really can come and help you stage your crop. I'm sure the more you do it, the better you're going to get at it, but it is tough. And that's why recommendations, some folks are saying up your seeding rate so the more your heads come into flower at the same time. We did that in our trial. We didn't see an interaction, meaning the recommendation we do for low seeding rate is the same as for high seeding rate. We were surprised. We thought upping the seeding rate should make it much more uniform.
My growers are upping the seeding rate on everything.
Yeah, well, the weeds control guys are telling you to do that as well, right? And O'Neill Harker, who used to work here, he would recommend that as well. Yeah, it is tough. And when you're farming hummocky land, like a lot of our land in Saskatchewan, the northern part is Duck Pond Lake, right? And it's all over the map. It's a hard decision. Yeah, so you know better than I. Other Fusarium questions or other questions you want to talk about with regard to sequencing, with regard to fungicide control?
So your plots and that for your varieties that you've chosen and that to set your baselines and that for reuse and highly susceptible, and that varieties like corn and wheat or
Yeah, for the most part, the first 2 years now, this is the second year, so last year the strips went this way, and now we seeded this way. So we have 10 crops on 10 stubbles. So we have 100 treatments. Next year, the whole thing will be seeded to durum. That's when we'll take the majority of the data. This year, we're just taking data on some of the cereals here, but next year we'll have 100 different sequences or treatments. So we are using durum. They're pretty much all susceptible, right? Moderately susceptible is as good as it gets, and that's better than susceptible, but not much. So yeah, corn susceptible to Fusarium. So we expect that corn should be our worst treatment. Corn on corn and then durum. That's probably the practice we would recommend the least, right? Because Fusarium does very well on corn trash, and you just have so much corn trash, right? So that's kind of, in my mind, that's our base treatment. Whereas if you go to something, 2 non-host crops, the pulses are susceptible in terms of root rots, but probably not a lot of the pathogens not proliferating on the residue of peas, say, nearly as much as corn. So flax shouldn't be an issue, things like that, but not too many flax growers, I don't imagine that will.
So do you harvest, leave all the trash on the plots?
Yeah, this is all no-till. Yeah.
No-till and no...
So we leave the residue here. So the idea is to see, what's the worst case scenario, so you guys can make a decision whether you want to risk it, be prepared to spray, and even then it might not work, or if you really can find something else to grow that can make you some return and reduce your risk of Fusarium in the years when you get heavy disease pressure. No fungicide at all. No, this is strictly a pathology trial, so I know maybe some people are disappointed with no spraying, but we're not spraying this trial at all. We want to see, what happens. Worst case scenario, yeah.
But you're not inoculating.
No.
It's just too big. I'd love to inoculate, but at least Ken's got irrigation here. In most sites, it's dry land. We don't have any other sites. The Manitoba sites we can't, and the Saskatchewan sites we can't. So this is the only one that's irrigated. But no, it's way too big, and I don't know. This must be at least 7 or 8 acres. I mean, I know for a farmer that's nothing, but for us guys, that's a lot of work. 100 plots 4 times, that's 400 plots next year. It's a huge trial.
With oats, is there an issue with Fusarium?
There is. It's just that oats has a panicle, so you don't see it spread up the spike so easily as you do in a cereal, but it's susceptible.
Fungicide timing, what would you recommend? What would you say?
Yeah, it'd be the same probably in terms of the flowering period, but I don't know. I haven't really talked to enough oat growers that have told me they spray. Do you grow oats and do you spray?
I do it this year,
Uh-huh.
but I just don't know when to spray.
You're a seed grower, or?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we have quite a few oat growers up in the northeast of the province, Choiceland, Melford area, but I haven't heard if they're spraying regularly, and to my knowledge, on a commercial field, I don't know. I don't think so. But generally, when I go look at an oat field, you'll see a kernel here on the panicle infected, a kernel here, but not usually all of the kernels, right? Where wheat, it can be the whole spike.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure the fungicide use in oats, but for a seed grower, I can see it. Yeah, okay. Yeah. Other questions? Other diseases?
What's the Fusarium like with the soft?
The soft whites, I guess, are not great either. I think they're pretty susceptible. There's just not a lot of breeding in some of the classes. Cookies, cakes. Oh, is that right?
So I mean,
Yeah.
that's an issue.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, if you're eating it, they must be testing it, right, before they mill it. Yeah. Like, I mean, the Europeans are really interested in lowering toxin levels in a lot of different crops and food products. So it's quite a concern for us as Canadians to be able to get our wheat down to the levels they're suggesting. So, yeah, it could be much more of an issue in the future.
So you're just going through plots next year and breeding disease, or are you going to take it to harvest and then
Oh, yeah.
do dawn testing too?
Yeah, the whole thing. So all of these plots next year will be harvested for yield. Then we'll look for FDK, Fusarium damaged kernels. Then we'll run it through and look at toxin, protein, 1,000 kernel weight, test weight. Yeah, that's why it's such a huge test. There's a lot of stuff to do here after harvest. Yeah. So Alejandra's trying to write her thesis, and hopefully she will get all the data by Christmas, maybe, we hope. So yeah, it's a large trial. But like I say, most of the sites, we have 5 crops in common, so it's not as onerous as, this is a big one. A lot of the sites are 5 by 5, so it's 25 treatments instead of 100. So, it's really a host, non-host. What are the hosts? What are the non-hosts? So they might be different crops, but if they're non-host, we'd consider them in the same, the same basically. But yeah, there's a lot of analysis that needs to be done on this.
It's still phenolphthalein, still the standard for
Well, a lot of people are using ELISA, immunoassay sorbent, I don't know, linked, an enzyme test basically. It's relatively cheap, I think $25 a sample. But we're now, one of the guys in the lab has not developed but perfected a test with mass spectrometry. So we're running our samples that way. It's more accurate, and we can actually detect more toxins than DON, because there are quite a few more toxins. DON's only one, right? Yeah, there's T2, HD2, Novalinol. There's quite a range of toxins, some of them worse than DON apparently. So we can detect those, and we're using the new method in our lab to do that. Yeah. Any other disease issues this year? In Saskatchewan, ergot, when I started my career 30 years ago, it seemed like every 10 years we have an ergot issue and then it'd go away. It's been much more of a problem, I think, with the damper. To me, cool springs. We have better falls, but the springs tend to be cooler and damper, well, except for this year. So we have had much more consistent problems with ergot, not over the whole province maybe, but certain areas. Here in Alberta, is it similar, or are you finding ergot more often? Rye for sure.
Especially the later tillers.
Yeah.
You get the heads on to, some stage, but the later stuff.
Yeah. Okay. Copper deficiency. Yeah. Well, it's copper if it's deficient for sure, and maybe if you're farming lighter land, maybe copper's more often. But I know, there's a lot of suggestions we should be putting a lot more copper on, but when we do soil tests, a lot of times it's not copper deficient, so it doesn't really mean you need more copper.
You follow up the fish test?
I've not been doing it, I'm just reading about it, right? But
That's the problem. Spend the money to look at it.
yeah, just when,
Standard 7% of the field.
right, could be that, could be that. It's just, once you get a lot of the insects going in the ditch and they bring it into the fields, that's coupled with the weather too. So I would still point to the weather as one factor, but maybe the copper issue is bigger than we think. So, yeah. How about canola diseases? Much issue with canola? No? Nobody's spraying for sclerotinia? What's that? Not on dry land.
Definitely.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't think too many farmers around here in irrigation will grow without spraying.
They just put it on. Yeah. Right, right.
Some guys are talking about twice now. So.
2 apps for sclerotinia.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, split up. I'm going to put
Yeah.
them in the industry with the multiple
Yeah.
applications. So, then you're getting flowering up to almost 4 weeks now. So these
Right.
and then you get 10, 14 days protection.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, the flowering period is much longer under irrigation, I guess. But yeah, we're so weather dependent in Saskatchewan. Our flowering period some years can be quite short, if it's hot and dry, and then other years, cool and damp, it can be maybe 4 weeks would be long. Yeah. So it's more of a decision, and I think a lot of Saskatchewan growers too. Sometimes you're so worried about Fusarium, you get that over with. You're not sure if you want to spend more money on sclerotinia or not. So it's more of a consideration sometimes. Where it sounds like for you, it's just a do it. Yeah. Anything else? You want to come and have a look at some of the crops? There's some really interesting stuff. There was quinoa, but it didn't turn out so well. But I think they're going to show you some quinoa just very close by anyway. Yeah, there's some really interesting crops that we don't have at all of the sites. But you can see some of the other interesting issues, the weed control issues. You can see the hemp. This was hemp, the first strip across here last year, and you can see the volunteer hemp because we just don't have the herbicides to control things like that.